Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I call to order the 26th meeting of the Economic and Social Council at the integration segment of its 2017 session. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon the Council will continue its consideration of Agenda Item 8, Integration Segment, with a panel discussion on policy instruments for an integrated approach to poverty eradication, to be followed at 4:30 with the conclusion of the general discussion of the segment. This morning we exchanged views and best practices on integrated policies, programs and initiatives to address poverty at the national level. This afternoon we will address more in-depth innovative instruments used for poverty eradication, as well as the policy environment and capacities that are necessary for their effective deployment. It is my pleasure to welcome our moderator this afternoon, Mr. Sanjay Reddy, Associate Professor of Economics, New School for Social Research. I am also pleased to welcome our panelists, Her Excellency Bente Angel Hansen, Permanent Representative of Norway to the United Nations in Vienna and Chair of the Commission on Narcotics and Drugs at its 60th session. Mr. Robert Kirkpatrick, Director of the United Nations Global Pulse. Ms. Hannah Al-Hilali, Managing Director of Amwal Financial Investments in Egypt. Mr. Shoaib Sultan Khan, Chairman of the Rural Support Programs Network in Pakistan. Without further ado, I now turn to the meeting over to our moderator to conduct the panel discussion. Mr. Reddy, you have the floor.
Let me call upon our last, but certainly not least, speaker, the very distinguished Mr. Shoaib Sultan Khan, who is the chairman of the Rural Support Programs Network in Pakistan, which, as many of you will know, is a quintessential example of an integrated approach to poverty eradication, which has had enormous imprint in Pakistan, but also in various countries in the South Asian region and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Most grateful to Vice President Nabil Munir for inviting me to participate in this session. Distinguished delegates and Professor Reddy. I'm a bit nervous because my granddaughter with her 4 friends was sitting in the visitors gallery, and I'm a bit afraid of the post-mortem of my speech. As the distinguished delegate from Egypt mentioned, why should we talk about poverty? If you say, how do I? This one? It's working? Okay. Look at the situation of the world. 20% of the world population consumes 80% of the global resources, and the poorest 20% only account for 1.3%. And this is a quote from Development and Cooperation Journal, published in Germany, from where I picked it up. When I look back on over 64 years of my working life in governments, United Nations, mainly UNICEF and UNDP, Aga Khan Foundation based in Geneva, and the rural support programs, my greatest successes, satisfaction, were when I was able to forge a meaningful partnership with the communities. And being a civil servant in the beginning, I had never thought that I'll do this, what I'm doing. But then nearly 59 years ago, I met a visionary whose name was Dr. Hamid Khan, and I was working at that time at the then East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. And when Dr. Hamid Khan died, Nobel laureate Professor Yunus wrote to me, "It is not enough to say that he was a great man. He was one of the great human beings of the past century. He was so much ahead of everybody else that he was seen more as a misfit than appreciated for his greatness. We have a lot to discover and a whole lot to learn from him." Dr. Hamid Khan gave me my first lessons in forging partnerships with communities. But it is only during the last 35 years that I got opportunity, thanks to UNICEF in Sri Lanka and UNDP in South Asia, and His Highness the Aga Khan mainly in Pakistan, where I exclusively was interacting with communities. Over this period, I have personally held dialogues with thousands of communities and inspired programs of poverty reduction in Pakistan, and surprisingly for all of you, in India, reaching nearly 50 million people. Let me be modest, tell you that almost 200 million poor people's livelihood has been improved through this approach. I still vividly remember the bitterly cold December 1982 when I drove about 600 kilometers from Islamabad to Gilgit to initiate a program which came to be known as the Aga Khan Rural Support Program. Forging partnerships over 12 years with 1 million people in a most inhospitable terrain of the world. K2 and so many other high peaks are situated in that area. I brought them a simple message but time-tested from the days of Raiffeisen in 19th century Europe, which was followed by Japan, Taiwan, Kumila in Bangladesh, and Semolundong in South Korea. This was a message of partnership development. AKRSP was not there to listen to their demands, needs, and problems and solve and offer solutions. AKRSP offered them only a methodology, an approach, and social guidance to overcome their handicaps themselves. The villagers used to look at me with disbelief. A program bearing the name of one of the richest person in the world, not willing to solve their problems and asking them to do things first. I used to explain this is a partnership which entails obligations on both sides, and unless the community was prepared to fulfill its obligations, how can the partnership be formed? Many were impatient and would pester me to tell them what was the limit to which the program would help them if they accepted the terms of partnership. And my simple response used to be, your limit is our limit. Whatever the community can do or was willing to do was the program limit. Gradually and incrementally we moved forward. I had already learned my lessons a few years ago, earlier at Daudzai, in the frontier province of Pakistan, now known as Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. When using a blueprint approach, a portfolio of projects was prepared without consulting the communities, which later on was found to have nothing in common with what the community wanted. The micro variations in the local level demand consultation and dialogues with each and every community. I was very happy when the approach was reinforced by the first World Bank assessment of AKRSP in 1987, saying that the first 4 years of AKRSP were the missed 4 years of all World Bank rural development programs, because the World Bank projects took precedence to blueprint instead of a process approach. The KRSP did not go to the communities with a preconceived package. It left to each community to identify their potential, not only as community but also at household level. Because poverty is at the household level. Unless you reach the household, poverty is not going to be eliminated. And believe me, I have seen people coming out of poverty with my own eyes and smiles on their faces instead of abstruse statistics. The 1 million people I worked with for 12 years in northern areas of Pakistan through the Aga Khan Rural Support Program reinforced my conviction of the tremendous potential and willingness in people to do many things themselves to come out of poverty. All that they needed was a support organization to help them unleash their potential. That reminded me of what Michelangelo used to say when people used to praise his David. He would say, I have done nothing. David was already in the marble. I simply removed the superfluous material. And that's true about even the poor and poorest. All that they needed was a support organization to help them unleash their potential. Once organized, the men and women took their destiny in their own hands. They knew what would bring them out of poverty and how they will come and do things themselves. So this is what I'm saying, that social mobilization, that is basically unleashing the potential of the people, unless that is done, people will not be able to improve their livelihood. And this is something which was accepted by the 1991 Independent South Asia Commission on Poverty Alleviation. And this is the recommendation they made, which was accepted in the SAARC summit at Dhaka in 1993, that the centerpiece of a policy framework for poverty alleviation has to be the mobilization of the poor in order to enable them to participate directly in the decisions that affect their lives and prospects. Now, why so? I'm sorry, I will have to take a few more minutes. Because the existing two pillars of a state, the administrative pillar from president to the patwari, or the political from the parliament to the lowest elected council, they don't have the capability to reach each and every household. So for doing that, what we need is a third pillar, the socio-economic pillar. And the socio-economic pillar is really, as Lincoln said, that democracy is of the people, by the people, for the people. The two pillars are by the people and for the people, but where is the pillar of the people? The pillar of the people is really the institutions of the people. The people who are organized, and when they are organized, they are in about 15, 25 households, that is the neighborhood. And then when a village is organized, then they become a village organization. And when they go beyond that, then they either become a union council, as in Pakistan, or a Mandal Samakhya in India. And the main thing is, Professor, that it has to be a holistic approach. It's not one thing which is going to bring them out of poverty. But the basic thing is social mobilization. If they are not organized, they cannot be empowered. If they don't themselves generate some money at least, because capital is power, they will never have that. And of course that potential which they have. And then you can bring in credit savings. And in India, as they started community investment fund, technical assistance in natural resource management, development of physical infrastructure, linkages with government departments, and of course local councils and all the others. Now, what has been the result? In Pakistan, although This is a program which requires full support from the government and resources from the government. It's not something which can be done by an NGO or by donors by themselves. And Pakistan, although we did not get the kind of support we should have got, but the sporadic support that we have got about 7.75 million households, and 51% of them are women, which is almost 40 million people. But look what happened in Andhra Pradesh, because the government adopted it fully, and in 1996, the UNDP-funded South Asia Poverty Alleviation Program was started, and last year when I visited them, there were 11.5 million households which had been organized, almost reaching 50 million people. And in 2011, Government of India initiated a National Rural Livelihood Mission, which aims at reaching 370 million people, which is almost 85% of the rural poor in the 17 states where it is working. So what I wanted to submit, of course it was a lot many things that I wanted to say, especially about what people have done. But my submission to the distinguished delegates of the UN Economic and Social Council is that the strategy and methodology based on time-tested principles of development encompassing policy instruments for an integrated approach to poverty eradication are already there. My mentor Akhtar Hamid Khan used to say these principles are as precise as the law of gravity. Going against these is like building crooked walls which will never stand. The challenge is, how does ECOSOC persuade governments of developing countries to implement the time-tested principles of development instead of reinventing the wheel? Thank you, sir.